She had no one left. Until the mountain man held her in his arms, she had grown used to the quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy around her like a thick blanket she couldn't shake off. It wasn't peaceful, at least not the kind of peace some people described. It was lonely, hollow, and sometimes frightening. She had no one left in her life who truly understood her. Her family, once her foundation, was gone. Her parents had passed away years ago in a sudden accident, leaving her alone to navigate a world that sometimes felt too cruel, too fast, and too cold. Friends had come and gone over the years, but none had stayed when life got hard. She was left with memories, a few old photographs, and the ache of being unseen and unheard. Her small home, tucked away on the edge of town near the mountains, was modest but safe. The walls were plain, the furniture simple, yet each corner held a story of her struggles and resilience. She had learned to manage everything on her own, from cooking meals to paying bills to keeping the house warm in the harsh winters. Her days were structured around survival, but the nights were the hardest. When darkness fell and the quiet stretched on for hours, she felt the emptiness pressing down on her chest, a constant reminder that she had no one to turn to, no one to call, no one who would come if she needed help. Despite the hardships, she had grown resourceful. She found small joys in simple things, watching the sunrise over the mountains, feeling the crisp morning air on her face, or tending to the little garden she kept outside. Each plant she nurtured seemed to whisper a quiet promise that life could continue, even when it was lonely. She often walked along the winding paths near her home, letting the mountains rise before her, their peaks touching the clouds, their slopes covered with thick forests. The mountains were both beautiful and intimidating, a place where she felt small but strangely alive. But even in the beauty of the mountains, fear sometimes found her. She had heard stories of people getting lost, of sudden storms that could sweep through without warning, leaving travelers stranded and desperate. She tried to avoid those dangers, but the pull of the mountains was strong, a silent call that sometimes led her to wander further than she should. On one chilly autumn morning, she decided to take a walk along a trail she hadn't explored before. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the sky was a pale, soft blue. She wrapped her coat tighter around her and started walking, feeling a mixture of excitement and unease. As she moved deeper into the forest, the sounds of the town faded. The wind whispered through the trees and the leaves rustled softly under her feet. For a moment, she felt a flicker of freedom, a sense that the world outside her home, with its rules and responsibilities, could not reach her here. But that feeling was fleeting. Soon, she realized the trail she had chosen was less maintained than she thought. Branches snagged at her coat, rocks jutted out from the ground, and the path twisted unpredictably. Her heart began to race as she tried to find markers or signs of the main trail, but the deeper she went, the more unfamiliar everything seemed. A sudden drop in temperature made her shiver. Clouds had rolled in, and the sun was now hidden behind a thick layer of gray. The wind picked up, rustling the trees louder, almost like a warning. She paused, realizing she might have underestimated the mountains. The path behind her looked different, almost as if it had shifted while she wasn't looking. Panic started to creep in. She had always been careful, always planned her trips, but this time, curiosity had led her too far. She called out softly, hoping the sound of her voice might reach someone, but there was no answer. Only the wind replied, echoing back to her in hollow whispers. She tried to retrace her steps, but the forest all looked the same. Each tree, each rock, each bend in the trail seemed to blur together. She realized she was lost. Her pulse quickened, her hands trembled slightly, and a knot of fear settled in her stomach. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely alone, not just alone in life, but alone in a place where no one could find her if something went wrong. Hours seemed to pass as she stumbled through the forest, her eyes scanning for anything familiar. Her phone, which she had kept in her pocket, had no signal. Her attempts to stay calm only seemed to make her more aware of her isolation. Night was approaching, and with it came the thought of cold, darkness, and uncertainty. She tried to take deep breaths, to focus on the sound of her own heartbeat, but the fear gnawed at her. She realized she needed help, and she needed it fast, but the thought of being so far from anyone who could assist her made her feel helpless. Then came the storm. It started with a sharp gust of wind, whipping through the trees, bending branches toward her. Rain followed, heavy drops that soaked her coat and made the ground slippery. She struggled to find cover, slipping and catching herself on roots and rocks. The forest that had seemed beautiful and inviting now felt hostile and unyielding. Lightning flashed through the sky, followed by the deep rumble of thunder. She tried to keep moving, but the storm seemed to close in on her from all sides. She knew that if she didn't find shelter soon, she could be in serious danger. Her legs ached, her body was wet and cold, and exhaustion began to set in. For a moment, she thought of giving up, letting the storm take over, and accepting that she might not make it through the night. But a small spark of determination pushed her forward. She climbed a steep slope trying to find a place to rest, and that's when she saw him, a figure moving with ease through the trees, calm and purposeful despite the storm. He was tall, strong, and looked as though he belonged to the mountains themselves. There was something reassuring in his presence, a sense that he knew these woods better than anyone else. The mountain man approached her slowly, his eyes scanning her with concern. He spoke in a calm, steady voice that cut through the chaos of the storm. "Are you okay?" he asked. She shook her head, unable to find words. He reached out a hand, steady and firm, and helped her to her feet. In that moment, she felt a surge of relief, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since she had become lost in the forest, she felt that someone truly cared. He led her to a small shelter he had prepared, a simple cabin tucked into the trees, hidden from the storm. Inside, it was dry and warm. A fire crackled in the hearth, and he offered her a blanket and a hot drink. She sat quietly, feeling both embarrassed and grateful. She had been alone for so long that accepting help felt strange, almost foreign, but she could not deny the comfort it brought. The mountain man did not rush her, did not press her with questions or judgment. He simply allowed her to rest, to feel safe, and to begin trusting him. As the storm raged outside, she began to share small pieces of her story. She spoke of her family, her losses, her fears, and her loneliness. He listened quietly, offering empathy but not pity. His presence was steady, a grounding force that made her realize that perhaps she did not have to face the world entirely alone. For the first time in a long while, hope flickered in her chest. She realized that someone had reached out to her, not because he owed her anything, but because he chose to help. That night, as she drifted into a much-needed sleep beside the warmth of the fire, she felt something she had not felt in years: safety. For the first time since her world had grown so empty, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she could find someone who would be there for her. Someone who could hold her when the world seemed too heavy. And as she slept, the storm outside slowly faded, leaving the mountains quiet once again, as if the world itself had paused to let her find a moment of peace. The night ended not with a dramatic revelation or sudden change, but with a quiet truth. She was no longer completely alone. The mountain man had entered her life, unasked but welcome, offering a hand to hold, a shoulder to lean on, and a heart that understood hers. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the mountains, casting light across the forest, she would begin to realize that her life might be about to change in ways she never imagined. The morning after the storm was quiet. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a golden glow over the forest. Birds chirped softly, and the air smelled fresh, clean, and alive. She woke to the gentle crackle of the fire and the faint smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she forgot where she was, and the reality of the previous night slowly returned. She had survived the storm, thanks to the mountain man, and she was safe. But that safety came with a new, unfamiliar feeling: trust. The mountain man was already awake when she stirred. He moved with calm efficiency, tending to a small fire and preparing simple breakfast. There was no rush, no expectation. He handed her a warm cup of coffee and a slice of bread, and she took it hesitantly, feeling awkward at receiving such care. Yet with each sip she felt the warmth spreading through her body, warming not just her hands but a part of her heart that had been frozen for years. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice gentle. There was no judgment, only genuine concern. She nodded, unsure of what to say. Words felt heavy, unnecessary. She simply watched him, noticing the way his eyes moved carefully, taking in the forest, the cabin, and her presence. There was something about him that made her feel small but not weak, vulnerable but not exposed. After breakfast, he offered to show her the surrounding area, suggesting that learning the paths might help her feel less anxious. She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to leave the safety of the cabin. But curiosity, the same curiosity that had led her into the forest the previous day, nudged her forward. She agreed, wrapping herself in a thicker coat, and followed him into the sunlight. The forest was different in the daylight. Shadows moved across the ground, leaves glistened with droplets from the storm, and the air carried a crisp freshness that made her lungs feel alive. The mountain man led her along a narrow trail, pointing out landmarks and explaining how to read the terrain. He taught her how to notice subtle signs of weather changes, how to find safe spots near streams, and how to identify trees and plants that could be helpful in emergencies. As they walked, she realized she had never felt so attentive, so present in a place before. Her mind, usually crowded with worries and memories, seemed to clear with each step. The mountains that had seemed intimidating now felt less threatening with him by her side. She began to ask questions, and he answered patiently, never rushing, never condescending. His calmness was contagious, and for the first time in a long while she felt she could breathe freely. They stopped by a small clearing where sunlight poured in, warming the damp earth. The mountain man motioned for her to sit, and they rested for a moment. She noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, a quiet kindness that made her chest tighten. She wanted to say something, to thank him, but the words felt fragile and inadequate. Instead, she simply nodded, and he smiled, a small, gentle smile that made her feel seen. While they rested, he told her a little about himself, not in great detail, but enough to give her a sense of his life. He had grown up near these mountains, learning to live off the land and navigate the wilderness. He had chosen a life of solitude, not because he disliked people, but because he found peace and clarity in the quiet of nature. He had a way of seeing the world that was grounded, practical, and yet deeply perceptive. She listened, fascinated, feeling a strange connection to someone she had just met. Hours passed as they explored. The mountain man taught her how to climb safely over rocks, how to follow a stream to find her way, and how to use natural landmarks as guides. She discovered muscles she didn't know she had, her body adapting to the effort required to move through the rugged terrain. At times she slipped or stumbled, and each time he was there, steadying her, guiding her hand, offering encouragement. She realized that for the first time in years she felt protected, not because she was dependent, but because someone was willing to walk beside her. As the afternoon wore on, clouds began to gather again, hinting at another storm. He suggested they return to the cabin. She hesitated, not wanting the day to end, but agreed. The walk back was quiet, comfortable, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but shared. When they reached the cabin, he lit the fire again, and she watched the flames dance, feeling the weight of exhaustion and relief settle over her. That evening, as she sat wrapped in a blanket, she realized something profound. She had not felt this safe, this calm in years. The storm had threatened to overwhelm her, but he had been there, a constant presence she could rely on. And more than just physical safety, she felt an emotional reassurance she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. The thought of opening up to someone had always terrified her, but now the idea seemed possible, even natural. Over the next few days, she stayed in the cabin, learning more from him and slowly regaining confidence. They shared meals, walked the forest trails, and sometimes just sat together in quiet. He never pressed her for conversation, never judged her for being cautious. Yet there was a growing understanding between them, a silent bond forming from shared moments and mutual respect. She began to smile more, to feel lighter, to trust in a way she hadn't thought possible. One morning, he took her to a stream running through a narrow valley. The water was clear and cold, rushing over smooth stones. He showed her how to fish using simple tools, how to find safe spots to drink, and how to stay alert for sudden changes in the weather. She listened, absorbing each lesson, feeling a mix of awe and gratitude. For the first time, she realized she could survive in the wilderness, not because she was strong alone, but because she had guidance and support. Their conversations, though few, were meaningful. He didn't ask about her past in detail, only what she felt comfortable sharing. She spoke of her parents, of losing her home in a fire years ago, and of the friends who had left her. He listened quietly, nodding, never interrupting, offering only reassurance when she faltered. It was different from anything she had known before. No pity, no judgment, just acceptance. And slowly she began to open up, sharing not just her fears but small hopes as well. Days turned into a week, and she began to realize that she had developed a dependence not on him in a desperate way, but in a trustful, growing sense of companionship. She didn't feel weak, she felt supported. She didn't feel lonely, she felt seen. And yet, there was a hesitation deep inside her, a question she hadn't dared to ask. What would happen when she left the mountains? Could this connection survive in the world beyond the forest, beyond the safety of his cabin and the quiet strength of his presence? Then came a moment that would forever stay in her memory. They were walking along a ridge, the mountains stretching endlessly in front of them, when she slipped on a wet rock. Time seemed to slow as she felt herself falling toward the edge of a steep drop. He reacted instantly, grabbing her hand and pulling her back to safety. She sat there, heart pounding, tears in her eyes, feeling the reality of how close she had come to danger, and how completely he had protected her. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here," she said, her voice trembling. He didn't speak immediately, only looked at her with steady eyes. "You would have survived," he finally said, "but it's okay to let someone help you." His words were simple, but they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. For years, she had believed that asking for help was a weakness. Now she realized it could be a strength, a way to survive, to heal, to grow. That night back at the cabin, she sat by the fire, thinking about everything that had happened. She realized that the mountains had taught her something important, not just about survival, but about trust, about connection, and about the quiet power of someone willing to care without asking for anything in return. She had found safety, warmth, and guidance, but more than that, she had found hope, a fragile yet undeniable hope that she could open her heart again, that she could allow someone into her life without fear. As she drifted to sleep, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The mountain man had not only saved her from the storm, but he had also shown her that she could trust again, that she could feel seen, and that she didn't have to face life completely alone. And though she didn't yet know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed forever, and for the first time in a long while, she was ready to face whatever came next, with someone by her side. When she returned to the town after her time in the mountains, she carried with her a quiet confidence she had never known. The world felt different now, less intimidating, less lonely. The mountain man's presence in her life, even when he wasn't there, had given her a sense of safety and reassurance that she hadn't felt in years. Every step she took along familiar streets felt lighter. The wind through the town's trees, the distant chatter of people, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, all of it seemed more vibrant, more alive. She realized she had been seeing the world in shades of gray for so long, and now colors were returning. At first, she tried to slip back into her old routines. She returned to her small apartment, checked her mail, and even attempted to cook meals the way she used to. Yet, there was a lingering sense of restlessness. The mountains had changed her. She could no longer ignore the emptiness of her life, the hollowness that came from isolation. Her job at the small local shop felt familiar but uninspiring. Customers greeted her with smiles. Coworkers exchanged polite chatter, but no one truly understood the quiet strength that had grown inside her during her time in the forest. She found herself thinking constantly about the mountain man. His calm, steady presence haunted her thoughts. She remembered his hand steadying her when she slipped, his patient voice guiding her through the storm, the gentle way he had offered warmth and safety without asking for anything in return. She realized she had never encountered anyone like him, someone so grounded, so selfless, and yet so quietly powerful. Her heart, which had been closed for so long, began to feel something unfamiliar, longing. Despite the comfort of her memories, reality intruded harshly. She returned to a life where no one truly depended on her, and no one offered the kind of protection she had come to rely on. Bills needed paying, groceries needed buying, and the routines of daily life felt heavier now that she had tasted a different kind of life, one where trust and companionship existed naturally. The contrast between her mountain refuge and the town was stark. The solitude of her apartment felt colder, emptier, and lonelier than ever. One afternoon, while walking through the market, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure across the street. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be him? She blinked, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her, but the figure moved with the same purposeful calm she remembered. He paused, scanning the crowd, and then, as if noticing her, began walking toward her. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected to see him again, certainly not in the middle of the town she thought was so far from the mountains. When he reached her, he smiled, a small, steady smile that made her chest tighten. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of warmth. She wanted to respond, but words failed her. Instead, she nodded, feeling the strange comfort of his presence wash over her. For the first time since she had left the mountains, she felt truly seen, not as a stranger, not as someone to be pitied, but as herself. He suggested they walk together, and she agreed. They strolled through the streets, side by side, as if no time had passed at all. He asked about her life since leaving the mountains, and she spoke cautiously, unsure how much to share. But he listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. His attention was focused entirely on her, and in that focus, she felt a sense of importance and worth she hadn't felt in years. Days turned into weeks, and they spent more time together. He introduced her to small, simple pleasures she had forgotten. Early morning walks to watch the sun rise, quiet afternoons in the park, and evenings by the river, watching the water flow steadily by. He never forced her into anything she wasn't ready for. Instead, he allowed her to move at her own pace, showing her that companionship didn't have to be rushed, that trust didn't have to be demanded. It could grow naturally, quietly, and safely. Yet, despite the comfort and joy she found in his presence, challenges arose. Some people in town were curious, even skeptical, about their relationship. Whispers followed them, and she sometimes overheard people questioning why she would spend so much time with someone so different from her. He seemed unaffected by it, steadfast and unshakable, but she felt a mixture of embarrassment and defensiveness. She had been cautious with people all her life, and now she had to navigate the judgments of a community she barely trusted. She also had to confront her own fears. Being around him stirred emotions she had long buried: fear of losing someone again, fear of opening her heart and being vulnerable, fear of letting herself hope for something more than survival. She spent quiet nights wrestling with these feelings, sometimes writing in a journal, sometimes staring out her window at the distant mountains, remembering the safety and calm she had felt in his cabin. She realized that trust and love were not weaknesses, but they required courage, and courage was something she had always been afraid she lacked. One day, a crisis brought them closer in a way that words never could. A sudden storm swept through the town, heavier than expected, with rain flooding the streets and strong winds toppling signs and branches. She found herself trapped outside, unsure how to get home safely. Panic rose in her chest, and she called out, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. Then he appeared, as if summoned by her fear. He took her hand, guiding her through the rain-soaked streets, shielding her from falling debris and keeping her calm when her fear threatened to overwhelm her. By the time they reached her apartment, she was soaked, shivering, and exhausted. But she felt safe. She realized that his presence was no longer just comforting, it was essential. She had survived storms before, both literal and metaphorical, but never with the certainty that someone would be there to help her through. And now she understood that he wasn't just a protector in moments of danger, he was a partner in life, someone who could share her burdens and lighten her load. In the following weeks, they faced smaller challenges together. She struggled with errands, bills, and the small responsibilities of daily life, but he was always there, patient and unwavering. He offered guidance when needed, but never imposed his will. He celebrated her victories, no matter how small, and offered comfort in moments of failure. Through it all, she felt herself growing, not just in trust and confidence, but in the ability to hope, to dream, and to believe that her life could be different from the loneliness and despair she had known for so long. Their connection deepened as they spent more time together. They shared stories of the past, dreams for the future, and quiet moments of laughter. She discovered that she could be herself without fear of judgment, that her vulnerabilities were met with care rather than scorn, and that her strength could coexist with her need for support. He, in turn, shared glimpses of his life, the solitude he had chosen, the lessons the mountains had taught him, and the moments that had shaped his calm and steady nature. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the distant hills, she realized how much she had changed. The fear and loneliness that had once dominated her life had softened. She could feel hope growing inside her, fragile but undeniable. She understood now that life didn't have to be faced alone, that companionship was not a weakness, but a source of strength. And in that moment, she realized she didn't want to return to the isolation that had once defined her existence. Her world, once gray and silent, was now filled with warmth, color, and the steady presence of someone who truly cared. She had survived storms alone before, but never like this, never with the knowledge that someone could walk beside her through life's uncertainties. And though challenges would inevitably come, she felt ready to face them, because she had found a person who would face them with her, who would hold her steady when fear threatened to take hold, and who would offer her strength when her own faltered. As the nights passed, she began to see a new kind of future, one where trust and care were not distant ideals but living realities, one where her heart could feel fully, without fear of abandonment. And one where, no matter what the world threw at her, she would no longer face it alone. The mountain man had not only guided her through the forest, but he had guided her to herself, to a place where hope, trust, and love were possible. Life had begun to settle into a rhythm, but it was not without its challenges. She had grown accustomed to the mountain man's presence, the calm reassurance he brought into her world, and the quiet support that made even ordinary days feel manageable. Yet the outside world had its own rules and pressures, and she realized that living alongside someone so steadfast came with lessons she hadn't anticipated. She was learning not only about trust but also about patience, compromise, and the courage it took to let someone truly in. One crisp morning, he suggested a trip to the nearby hills, a place he knew would be quiet and safe. It was an escape from the noise of the town, a chance to breathe without the weight of expectation pressing on her. She agreed, excitement and a small flicker of nervousness intertwining in her chest. As they walked, the air was fresh and earthy, the scent of pine and grass soothing her frayed nerves. She realized she had come to crave these moments, the calm, the silence, the gentle companionship that never demanded, never judged. They reached a secluded valley, where a small stream wound lazily between moss-covered rocks. Sunlight filtered through the trees, painting the water in gold and silver streaks. He gestured for her to sit on a large rock near the stream. The sound of water flowing over stones was hypnotic, calming, almost meditative. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to simply exist in the space between fear and freedom. "You've changed," he said softly, watching her with quiet intensity. She opened her eyes, surprised, and turned to him. "What do you mean?" she asked, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "You're calmer now, more confident," he replied. "You're not as afraid of the world or of yourself." His words struck a chord deep within her. For years she had moved through life cautiously, always guarding against loss, against disappointment, against people leaving. And now, here was someone noticing the change she hadn't fully acknowledged herself. The truth was undeniable. She had grown stronger, yes, but also more vulnerable in ways she hadn't experienced before. Her heart was beginning to open, allowing her to feel emotions she had long suppressed. Trust, once foreign, was now tangible. And yet, the fear of losing it all still lingered in the corners of her mind. She had survived storms before, literal and metaphorical, but now the stakes felt higher. Letting herself feel close to someone meant exposing herself to the possibility of heartbreak. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. It reminded her that life, even in its calm moments, was unpredictable. She realized that trusting someone didn't remove the danger or the uncertainty. It simply meant sharing it with someone else, facing it together. She looked at him, noticing the steady calm in his eyes, the surety in his stance, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. Perhaps this was what she had been missing all along, not someone to rescue her, but someone willing to face the world with her. As they spent the day together, helping each other navigate the uneven terrain, sharing small jokes and pointing out birds or interesting rock formations, she began to feel a profound sense of belonging, not just with him but in the world itself. The fear and loneliness that had once defined her life were slowly receding, replaced by the confidence that came from being supported, from being seen, and from being allowed to rely on someone without shame. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One afternoon, as they returned from a long hike, a sudden accident changed the rhythm of their peaceful days. A branch, weakened by the recent storms, gave way under his weight as he helped her navigate a steep slope. He fell, twisting his ankle badly. She froze for a moment, panic rising in her chest. For the first time in their relationship, the roles reversed. She was the one who had to act, to provide support, to take responsibility. Her mind raced, but she didn't falter. Using the knowledge he had patiently taught her, she carefully stabilized his ankle, guided him down the slope, and carried him part of the way when he could not bear the weight. Her heart pounded, not just from exertion but from the realization that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The mountain man, who had always been her protector, was now relying on her strength and resourcefulness. In that moment, she understood that their connection was mutual. Trust, support, and love were not one-sided. They were a shared responsibility, a bond forged through both calm and crisis. Back at the cabin, she tended to his injury with care. The mountain man, usually so composed and self-reliant, allowed himself to be vulnerable, trusting her completely. She noticed how his eyes softened when he looked at her, a quiet acknowledgement of his reliance and gratitude. That night, as the fire crackled, they sat close together in silence, each reflecting on the lessons of the day. Words were unnecessary. The shared experience had deepened their bond in a way that conversation could never capture. The accident marked a turning point. She realized that their relationship was not just about companionship, but about facing challenges together, supporting each other in moments of vulnerability, and trusting that love could endure even when life became difficult. She began to feel a profound sense of pride, not in herself alone but in what they had built together, a partnership rooted in trust, mutual respect, and unspoken understanding. But life continued to present challenges. Her past, once kept at a distance, began to resurface. Old friends reached out, some with intentions she couldn't fully trust. Memories of loss, abandonment, and loneliness crept back into her thoughts, testing the resilience she had built in the mountains. At the same time, she noticed subtle judgments from the townspeople, curiosity, skepticism, and whispers about her growing closeness with the mountain man. It was a reminder that the world outside their quiet refuge could be unforgiving, and that navigating life together would require courage beyond simply surviving the wilderness. Through it all, he remained steadfast. He offered guidance when she wavered, reassurance when doubt crept in, and quiet patience when she struggled with fears rooted in past losses. She realized that true strength was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. And in him, she saw a mirror of that strength, a calm, steady force that encouraged her to believe in herself while offering unwavering support. One evening, a particularly harsh winter storm swept through the town. Snow piled high on rooftops, winds howled through the streets, and power lines threatened to snap under the weight of ice. They were trapped inside the cabin for several days, isolated from the rest of the town. It would have been overwhelming for anyone alone, but together, they found a rhythm. She chopped wood, helped cook meals, and ensured the cabin remained warm and safe. He shared stories of his life in the mountains during harsh winters, teaching her survival skills she had never imagined needing. During those long, cold days, she felt a deep, abiding sense of connection. They laughed together, shared memories, and even danced quietly in the firelight when the wind outside roared too loudly. She realized that joy, like strength, could be shared and amplified when someone truly cared for you. Her loneliness, which had once been a constant shadow, seemed to retreat further with each passing day. She understood that they were no longer merely companions. They were partners in the truest sense, each offering what the other needed to survive, to grow, and to heal. As winter slowly gave way to spring, she felt a new sense of hope taking root in her heart. The trials they had faced together, physical challenges, storms, fears, and doubts, had strengthened their bond in ways words could not capture. She no longer feared letting herself be vulnerable. Instead, she embraced it, knowing that he would be there, steady and unwavering. And in that acceptance, she found the courage to dream of a future she had never allowed herself to imagine, a life filled not with solitude but with shared moments, laughter, and love. Her transformation was subtle but undeniable. She moved through the world with more confidence, spoke with more assurance, and even smiled more freely. The mountain man, who had once seemed like a distant figure of calm and strength, was now an integral part of her life. She realized that trust, once a fragile and foreign concept, had become a foundation, a solid ground upon which she could rebuild her sense of self and her vision of the future. And yet, there remained a quiet tension, a question that lingered in her mind. Could this trust withstand the unpredictable challenges of life beyond their secluded refuge? The answer, she suspected, would come not through words but through experience. Together they had faced storms, injuries, and the quiet trials of daily life. The true test of their bond, she understood, would be facing the broader world, with its uncertainties, judgments, and occasional cruelties. As she drifted off to sleep that night, listening to the wind rustle through the trees and the faint murmur of the stream outside, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had discovered not just love and trust, but resilience, courage, and the quiet power of shared life. And in that gratitude, she understood something essential. Life was no longer something to endure alone. With him by her side, she could face whatever came next, confident that together, they could weather any storm. Spring had fully arrived in the mountains, painting the world with green leaves, blooming flowers, and the soft songs of birds returning from their winter journeys. The sunlight was warm but gentle, streaming through the trees and illuminating the cabin where they had shared so many moments of learning, laughter, and quiet connection. She woke that morning with a sense of anticipation, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in years, a belief that life could be more than survival, more than enduring loneliness, more than simply existing. The mountain man was already up, tending to the fire, the cabin filled with the smell of fresh bread and coffee. He looked up and smiled when he saw her stirring. His calm presence had become a constant, comforting rhythm in her life, a force she relied on not out of necessity, but out of deep trust and affection. She realized as she watched him how much she had grown, not just in strength, but in heart, in courage, in the ability to love without fear. They spent the morning in quiet companionship, preparing a simple breakfast and sharing small tasks around the cabin. It was domestic, ordinary, yet extraordinary in its intimacy. Every glance, every smile, every small act of care was a reminder of how far she had come, from the frightened, isolated woman lost in the storm, to someone who could now share her life openly and fully with another person. Each moment reinforced the reality that trust and love, when nurtured patiently and respectfully, could heal even the deepest wounds. After breakfast, they decided to explore a part of the mountains they had never visited. The trail was gentle, lined with wildflowers, and the air was fragrant with the scent of pine and blooming grass. They walked side by side, talking softly, sharing stories and laughing at small, everyday things. She realized how natural this felt, how comfortable it was to be herself without fear of judgment or rejection. The mountain man listened intently, responded thoughtfully, and offered gentle guidance when she faltered. In his presence, she discovered the quiet joy of being fully known and fully accepted. As they reached a small clearing overlooking a valley, he stopped and gestured for her to sit. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills, sparkling streams, and the distant peaks framed against the sky. She felt a surge of gratitude, a sense of peace she hadn't known since childhood. Here, away from the pressures of the town, the judgments of others, and the memories of her past loneliness, she could breathe fully, live fully, and simply be herself. He looked at her with a seriousness that made her heart flutter. "You've come so far," he said softly. "You've grown stronger, braver, and more open than I've ever seen anyone. You've trusted, you've cared, and you've allowed yourself to feel again." His words resonated deeply. She realized that she had not only survived the storms and challenges of life, but she had also transformed. The woman who had once been isolated, fearful, and hesitant had become someone capable of love, courage, and profound trust. For a moment they sat in silence, the wind rustling through the leaves, the sun casting patterns of light and shadow across their faces. The world felt immense yet intimate, dangerous yet safe. She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. The gesture was simple but significant. It was a promise, a bond, and a declaration of their shared journey. In the weeks that followed, their life together continued to blossom. They learned to rely on each other not just in moments of danger, but in everyday life. She began to embrace the rhythm of the mountains, the simplicity of domestic tasks, and the deep satisfaction of shared work. He, in turn, showed her how to navigate challenges with patience and calm, how to face fears without being overwhelmed, and how to find joy in ordinary moments. Together, they created a life that was balanced, nurturing, and filled with quiet happiness. She found herself laughing more freely, dreaming more openly, and feeling emotions she had long suppressed. She discovered the power of companionship, the beauty of mutual support, and the comfort of unconditional care. Every glance, every word, every small gesture between them reinforced the truth that she was no longer alone, that she had found someone who would stand by her through storms, hardships, and moments of doubt. One day, as they walked along a sun-dappled trail, he stopped and turned to her. His eyes held a depth of emotion that made her heart race. "I want you to know," he said, his voice steady but filled with feeling, "that I am here for you. Not just for the easy days, but for everything, the storms, the challenges, the fears, and the joys. I want to face life with you together." She felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and gratitude. She realized that she could finally allow herself to fully trust, fully love, and fully belong. From that day forward, they became inseparable. Their lives intertwined seamlessly, each finding strength and comfort in the other. She was no longer just surviving. She was living, thriving, and discovering the depth of happiness that comes from true connection. The mountains, once a place of danger and uncertainty, had become a sanctuary, a home, and a testament to their shared journey. Months passed, and with the changing seasons came new challenges and joys. She learned to navigate the winters with confidence, to prepare for storms, and to face uncertainties with a calm she had never known. He, in turn, showed her the beauty of patience, the value of steady support, and the joy of simple pleasures, like watching the sunrise over the peaks, listening to the quiet flow of a stream, or tending to a small garden together. Their life, though simple, was rich with meaning, connection, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, they sat together on the porch of the cabin. She leaned against him, feeling the steady strength of his presence, the warmth of his body, and the calm assurance that no matter what life brought, they would face it together. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and gratitude. He held her closer, resting his chin on her head. "Neither did I," he replied softly. "But here we are, and we're stronger together." Their story was no longer about fear, loneliness, or survival. It was about love, trust, and shared life. The mountains had taught them both lessons in resilience, courage, and patience. They had faced storms, injuries, fears, and uncertainties together, and each challenge had strengthened their bond. She had learned that love was not about perfection, but about choosing to stand by someone, to support them, and to allow them to support you in return. Spring turned to summer, and their life continued in a steady, joyful rhythm. They hiked, explored new trails, and discovered hidden corners of the mountains. She learned to fish, forage, and navigate the terrain with confidence. He learned to enjoy the small domestic routines she cherished. Together, they created a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet, comforting rhythm of shared life. And one quiet evening, as they watched the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky, she realized something profound. She had finally found a place where she belonged, not just in a physical sense, but in her heart and soul. The fears that had once dominated her life had been replaced by trust. The loneliness that had shadowed her existence had been replaced by companionship. And the uncertainty that had haunted her every step had been replaced by hope and love. She had no one left before, yet now she had someone who would stand by her through every storm, who would hold her when fear threatened to overwhelm, and who would share in every joy and sorrow. The mountain man had not only rescued her from a literal storm in the mountains, but he had also rescued her from the storm of her own heart, the doubts, fears, and loneliness that had held her captive for so long. In the quiet of the mountains, under the endless sky, she felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. She had found safety, love, and a shared life that promised resilience, happiness, and growth. The journey that had begun with fear, isolation, and uncertainty had led her to a place of profound connection and joy. And as she held his hand, feeling the steady warmth of his presence, she knew without a doubt that her life would never be the same again. Together they faced the world, not as two separate individuals struggling alone, but as partners, companions, and equals. They had learned that love was not just about affection, it was about trust, mutual support, courage, and shared resilience. And in that realization, she finally understood the full meaning of the mountain man's quiet, steady presence. He had shown her that even in a world filled with uncertainty, fear, and loneliness, love could create a sanctuary, a home, and a life worth living. And so, under the endless sky, surrounded by the mountains that had once seemed so frightening and now seemed so full of promise, she finally smiled fully, freely, and without hesitation. She had found her home, not just in a place, but in a person, in a bond, in a life shared with someone who truly understood and cherished her. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what storms might come, she would never face them alone again.